Now, I want to take a closer look at these first home buyer financing changes that were announced today by the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. Now, he says this will make it easier for Australians to get a foot onto the property ladder, but there are significant concerns this is actually going to do the opposite, pushing up house prices further out of reach. Now, the Shadow spokesman, Shadow Minister for Housing, Senator Andrew Bragg, has been deeply critical of the government's efforts to tackle housing, and this latest announcement even prompting a sly backhander from the Prime Minister today.
Now, maybe the member can have a word with Senator Bragg, ring him up this afternoon and say, mate, I think you've got this wrong. I think you've got this wrong. I think you should back in the government on our policies. And while they're at it, they can back in our entire Homes for Australia plan.
Senator Bragg joins us now. What did you make of that?
Good afternoon. Good evening, Steve. Well, the government's hopeless on housing. They have presided over a massive collapse in housing construction whilst basically putting Australians through the largest increase in population in our history. So they've been an absolute disaster on housing, and we're all paying the price.
Well, every time I raise this issue of housing with people who don't follow politics particularly closely, often the response is just that, Andrew. Well, why are we letting so many people into the country if we haven't got anywhere for them to live?
Well, in fact, when we asked questions at Senate estimates about whether the Treasury Department had modelled the impact of having over 1 million people coming into the country but only building a couple of 100,000 houses at the same time, they said that they hadn't been asked to do any modelling. And in fact, Katie Gallagher said it was good that they hadn't modelled that nexus. So there you go.
So, I mean, I go back to, when I was trying to buy my first house and I never had enough, I spent too much money having a good time probably, so I never had enough money for a deposit, but my partner at the time did. We managed to scramble it together and get a loan from the bank. What worries me about this is this 5% idea that you can go out and now you can earn whatever money you want. You can go out and apply for a 5% loan, and the Australian taxpayers are going to guarantee that loan to that bank. Is that how it's going to work?
Well, it's absolute insanity. So the Commonwealth Government will become the biggest mortgage insurer in the country, and the Commonwealth will be underwriting all the mortgages because it won't be means tested. And so you can see that very wealthy people, the children of billionaires perhaps, will become subjects of the scheme. And I mean, welfare is for people who really need it, Steve. It's not for people who have a lot of money. And when the scheme was initially introduced, it was about lower income people. And now expanding it to all Australians potentially who want to buy a first house without any means testing or income caps, I think is just a crazy idea that the nation can't afford.
And there's not even a cap any longer on the number of these loans that will be able to be accessed, is there?
There's no cap on that. So my sense is that the cost of this new scheme will be in the tens of billions of dollars in terms of the contingent liability. And I just think when you're looking at 10 years of budget deficits, this is another example of spending and costs, even if it's contingent liabilities, that the nation can't afford. So these guys, I mean, I'm very confused. It's hard to follow. They say they're against red tape, and now they introduce a universal government scheme for mortgage insurance. Similarly, they introduce a government property developer. So it's incoherent at best, Steve. Either you're against red tape or you're for red tape. I just find it very hard to follow.
So what's to stop me if I've got an 18-year-old and a 19-year-old using them as first home buyers to apply for a low interest loan for a property at 5% guaranteed by the government? I pay the mortgage and I've suddenly got myself two properties that I'm not going to live in. You're going to have to prove you live in this property?
Well, there'll be the usual anti-avoidance measures which are already part of the scheme. But the point is that it was a targeted scheme for low-income earners. Now it's going to be a scheme for any first homeowner, including the children of billionaires. So what that means is that the overall liability will be funded by all taxpayers. So I don't see why the average Aussie taxpayer should be funding a mortgage insurance product for the child of a billionaire. Now, I have nothing against billionaires, Steve, but I think it's very weird for a Labor government to be prioritising this. But as I say, it is actually in character with their whole budget strategy, which is to run the joint into the ground. And as I say, we're looking at 10 years of deficits. And this is the sort of largesse which the country just can't afford. So I would say to you that at best, the government is confused. Either they want the private economy, tradies, builders and developers, to be building the houses and providing that part of the economy, or they believe that a Canberra-based bureaucracy should be building houses through the Housing Australia Future Fund, doesn't build many houses, and that Canberra should also be providing mortgage insurance for everyone.
Well, one bank economist this evening has been quoted as saying, well, the only people who are going to really benefit from this are people who get in very quickly, because the net effect of this is it's going to drive up property prices quickly.
Yeah, well, look, demand-side measures can actually make the situation worse, often are very likely to do so. And the main problem is that we are living through the biggest population surge in our history since the 1950s. But subsequently, we've had a massive collapse in housing construction. So the government is giving us more people than ever and fewer houses. So they've got no chance of meeting their housing supply targets. Their Housing Australia Future Fund has $10 billion and it's only built 17 houses in 2 years. So the supply side is a nightmare. Now they come onto the demand side with a universal scheme for people who don't need government welfare. And then it's quite clear that these guys are never going to solve the housing crisis because they're incoherent and incompetent.
So just explain to me, in question time today, the opposition were asking questions about why the government was copying opposition policy that which you went to the last election with.
Yeah.
How did your scheme differ to what Anthony Albanese's announced today with Claire O'Neill?
Yeah, so the government have taken two policies that the Liberal Party and the National Party took for the last election. The first is the freeze to the National Construction Code. So the idea of that policy is to stop some of the costs into the system, which is making home building uneconomic. And the second policy was in relation to the Environmental Protection Act. So we wanted to approve a lot of the houses that have been blocked up because a parrot flew over a block of land in 1971 and therefore now you can't have any houses there. So those were two policies that we had that have now become part of Labor's options.